Lily, I'm handing the floor to you to share as you are willing and able.
Thanks so much, Doris, and hi, everyone. Jan, thank you for that. An excellent overview, far better than I could have done. And I think will make my job a lot easier to try to give you a sense of what's going on the ground. Can you guys hear me okay? I know there's a little bit of background noise, and I apologize for that.
You're good.
So for those of you who don't know, my name is Lily Hartzell. I grew up attending the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City in California, just south of San Francisco. And now I am getting my master's degree in Boston at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is the international relations grad school that's attached to Tufts University. And I'm focusing there on climate diplomacy and increasingly on climate finance. So I'm in my second year. I'm going to graduate in May. And at COP, I'm wearing several different hats. First and most importantly, I'm representing the UUA. I'm very grateful to have that opportunity. That's where my badge, which is how you get into the conference, my badge says Unitarian Universalist Association. And then I'm also a Fletcher student, and there's a whole delegation of students from my program here, both PhD and master's students like myself, and then also several deans and professors, and including the dean of our whole school, a woman named Rachel Kite, who was very senior at the World Bank, a vice president in charge of climate change, and was instrumental to creating the Paris Agreement and is a luminary on climate finance generally. And so I've had the opportunity to staff her on the ground. So I've essentially been running around after her all day, every day, trying to make sure that she gets places on time and getting to sit in on some really, really cool meetings and take notes for her, and just kind of ride her coattails through the conference, which has been a lot of fun and given some good purpose to this event. So that's kind of my role here. I thought I wanted to start by saying that this is an incredibly overwhelming experience. And there is very little time to process anything, especially in the role that I'm in, this kind of staffer role. And so my thoughts are somewhat scattered and pretty surface level. But I will share a few of them anyway, and then I can share more once I've had a little bit of time to process. I think one thing I will say, I'm lucky enough to go to Glasgow last year as well, to the conference that Jan mentioned that happened last year, COP26, also as in the part of the Fletcher delegation, and found it to be a very emotional experience. I was just kind of a at-large delegate and really just struck by the impacts of climate change that people were sharing. This year, I have not had that experience as much. This year, it's been a much more technical experience, which is interesting and very relevant to my career as well. But just a note there. So just to give a little bit of color on the ground, COP is basically a 3-ring circus. The inner ring and what everything is built around is the negotiations, which is basically, there are several different kind of conventions or agreements or protocols that every country in the world is party to, and they are negotiating issues underneath that. Now that we have the Paris Agreement, it's kind of the overarching framework that we're working within, but they're negotiating issues like climate finance, who should pay how much to whom, and for what reasons. Should it be to lower our emissions? Should it be to adapt to climate change? Should it be to pay for inevitable disasters that will happen because the climate is changing, whether we like it or not? There are issues around who should be pledging their emissions reductions for, and how much should they be reducing. There are issues on how should we be monitoring and evaluating the success of the Paris Agreement. You name it. So there are all these kind of technical tracks, and there are negotiators who specialize in each of these tracks, and they spend all their time in big soulless meeting rooms, talking it out and trying to come up with language that then is voted on by the entire, all the countries that are party to the agreement. Usually it's maybe like 20 or so countries will get together and talk about one issue, and then everyone votes on the outcome of that. So that's kind of that's the inner ring of the circle. And within that inner ring, there's kind of 3 levels. There's the technical level, the negotiators, the staffers, who really know the issues, and it's very much about the nitty-gritty. And then there's the ministers, so know, a Janet Yellen, say, or a Secretary Granholm, or a Secretary Kerry, or a who come in and have a little bit more of a political level. They usually come in the second week and try to finalize whatever it is that the technical people have been working really hard on the first week. And then there's the upper level, which is the heads of state. And they sometimes come in and broker really big kind of high level deals, though that's less likely to happen this year, and I'll explain why in a minute. So there's kind of 3 levels within the inner ring of this 3-ring circus. And then the second ring is civil society and experts. And there are huge pavilion halls where lots of different organizations, every environmental organization you've ever heard of is here. And they are trying to influence the conversation that's happening in that inner ring, and also just connect with each other. I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's kind of a party. It's all the people who care about this issue coming together and reconnecting once a year, and sharing the latest science and sharing the latest strategy, and building support and arguing about what the direction to go is, and holding lots and lots of events to try to kind of influence this innermost conversation. And then the third ring of the circus is the media. And so obviously there's a lot of reporters here who are trying to understand and explain what's going on in those other 2 rings. And so you can understand why it's a bit of an overwhelming experience, because you can be going to, there are maybe 20 events you could be going to at any 1 hour of the day at least. And it could be anything from, oh, I want to sit in on this very technical negotiation about, you know, climate finance, versus, oh, I want to go to a performance of, you know, Indigenous people living in the Yukon talking about how they are stewards of the earth, to, oh, I want to go to you know, announcement of a big new report that's come out about what our world's going to look like in 2050. So there's just a huge range of things that you can be doing with your time at any one moment, if you're just an observer like me. So there's kind of different strata of people who are attending, and you can be a negotiator or you can be an observer. And then I think I can talk more specifically, the things I've been tracking in particular are climate finance, because that's what my interest is in, and also what Dean Kite is focused on. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit more in detail about some of those issues, but maybe better to see what questions people have, so that I don't go too deep if there's no interest. I think the one last thing I'll say, sorry, Doris. Yeah, just the one last thing I'll say is on the color is just the incredible diversity present at a conference like this. It's literally, there are people here from every country in the world, 200 countries, or 196 or 7. And many people are in traditional dress. There are many, many representatives from Africa this year, which was not as much the case last year, which is really beautiful to see. There's singing and dancing. There are people doing their prayers in the corner of negotiating rooms, you know, finding Mecca and just kind of finding a corner and doing their thing. And you get on, there are these shuttles that take us from our hotels to the venue. And it's like the most diverse shuttle ride you could ever be. You get on a bus and it's like someone from every country in the world is on this bus and every language is being spoken. And it's just a really cool experience. It's very much kind of speaks to that interdependent web element of being a Unitarian. I've been thinking about that a lot. So that, trying to paint a little bit of a picture of what it looks like here. But I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, let me suggest, because climate finance is so confusing, and I've been trying to break it down for a while. So why don't you take maybe 5 minutes on that, and then we'll just do total questions for both you and Jan Dash.
Okay.
I mean, if that works for you.
Yeah. So I think on there's a lot talking about climate finance. I think maybe I'll break it down into the overarching question is the one that I already mentioned, which is who owes how much money to who. And there are kind of 3 categories of, well, I think Jan made this point very well, which is that we need tens of trillions of dollars for the carbon economy, and much of that developing point, validly so, is that they have done almost nothing to contribute to climate change, particularly the smallest ones, and yet are already facing the biggest impacts from it. And so there's kind of three different streams in which they need assistance. One is mitigation, so reducing carbon emissions, renewable energy, et cetera. One is adaptation, which is dealing with what's happened, moving to higher ground, changing the way you're building your highways, et cetera. And then one is loss and damage, which you may have heard of. It's been making the headlines, which is the idea advanced by developing countries that they are constantly having to pass the hat around in the international community in order to get funding to deal with disaster after disaster. And that is exhausting and unsustainable, and often leaves them in debt, which they cannot afford. And so there's an idea that they need dedicated finance for that, to deal with just the disasters that are already happening and will continue to happen. And so there are all these different mechanisms by which this money is delivered. There's a big high-level goal, the $100 billion goal that was set in 2009, where developed countries said, okay, by 2020, we will be giving $100 billion a year in climate. Surprise, they did not hit that goal, and it's been extended to 2025. And now there's a big set of negotiations around what should the new goal be once 2025 rolls around. So that's been a set of negotiations I've been tracking very carefully. There's also a whole set of negotiations around carbon markets. How are we going to pay for and regulate? Can we reduce the cost of mitigating emissions by trading actions that we're doing? And then how do we regulate that? And then loss and damage is a really big category of negotiations. The developing countries pushing really hard to get a separate stream of finance, and developed countries, mainly the US, being very resistant to that. So those are the three big climate finance issues that are on the table at COP27. I can't give many updates on progress that they've made because we're only on day 3 of a 2-week conference. So let me stop there and I can take questions.